My life stopped. I could breathe, eat, and drink, but there was no life. Have you ever felt that unsettling emptiness, that quiet dread, even when you seem to have it all? The world looks at your life and sees nothing but success, but you feel a growing sense of meaninglessness. This isn't just a modern affliction. It was a crisis that brought one of the greatest writers in human history to the brink of taking one's own life. Leo Tolstoy, the author of masterpieces like War and Peace and Anna Karenina, had everything society could offer: immense fame, vast wealth, a loving family. Yet at the peak of his success, he fell into a profound existential void. His life, as he wrote, simply stopped. He could go through the motions, but the purpose, the very essence of life, had vanished. This wasn't just a personal struggle. It was a universal human journey, one that asks us to confront the deepest questions about our purpose. Tolstoy's story is a powerful reminder that material and intellectual achievements are not enough to sustain us. They can't provide the answer to why we're here. So, if you're ready to explore what happens when we confront that emptiness, stay with me, because we'll dive into Tolstoy's remarkable journey from despair to a radical spiritual rediscovery, a story that, in the end, reveals a timeless truth about what truly matters. For Tolstoy, the crisis wasn't a slow descent. It was a sudden, jarring awakening. He had finished his monumental works, secured his place in history, and built a comfortable life. But one day, he was simply paralyzed by a question. What is the purpose of my life? Is there any meaning in it that death will not destroy? It was a question that haunted his every thought, turning the joy of his accomplishments into ashes. He realized that the fame and wealth he had accumulated were just fleeting illusions. No matter how many people read his books or how much land he owned, none of it would matter in the face of death. This realization was so terrifying that he became afraid of mundane objects like ropes and guns, fearing that in a moment of weakness, he would end his own life. This feeling of meaninglessness, of being trapped by your own success, is a powerful and relatable experience. Tolstoy saw that his life, though outwardly successful, lacked a foundational purpose. He had been living a life based on the expectations of his class and society, a life that a philosophical hammer had now shattered. He realized that living a life without a clear why was a cruel joke. His crisis forced him to move beyond the superficial and seek something more profound. It was a moral reawakening, a radical rejection of the very values that had defined his life until then. In his desperate search for answers, Tolstoy turned to the intellectual world. He devoured books on philosophy and science, hoping to find a logical, rational answer to the question of life's purpose. He studied Plato, Schopenhauer, and the great thinkers of his time, hoping their words would illuminate his path. But all he found was more despair. Science could tell him how the universe worked, but not why. Philosophy could analyze the problem, but couldn't give him a reason to live. He realized that the intellectual elite were in a similar state of nihilistic paralysis, simply pretending to have answers. He began to observe how other people dealt with this absurd reality. He identified 4 main responses. First, there were those who were too apathetic to even care, content to live and die without ever questioning anything. He saw this as a form of spiritual cowardice, a choice to remain ignorant. Second, those who sought pleasure to distract themselves from the big questions, living a life of hedonism and self-indulgence. He saw this as a temporary escape, a way of masking the pain without ever healing it. Third, there were those who, like him, saw the emptiness and chose to end their lives. He respected their honesty, but couldn't bring himself to join them. And finally, there were those who, like him, were paralyzed, unable to move forward, but also unwilling to choose death. Tolstoy felt a deep kinship with this last group. Exhausted and without an intellectual escape route, this intellectual quest showed him that the answers he was looking for were not going to come from the mind alone. The path of pure reason was a dead end. The turning point in Tolstoy's life didn't come from a book or a lecture. It came from the people he had always looked down upon, the peasants. He began to observe their lives, their simple faith, their tireless work, and their unwavering acceptance of life's hardships. They didn't have intellectual answers to the meaning of life, but they lived with a deep-seated purpose. They lived with faith and humility. This was his epiphany. He realized that the meaning of life wasn't found in logical proofs, but in the living of it. The aristocratic life he had led was filled with dangers that he now saw were pointless. It was the arrogance of his intellect that had blinded him. His journey of redemption was a choice, a voluntary confrontation with the truth. He began to reject his aristocratic lifestyle, working with his own hands, living simply and advocating for nonviolence. He found his answers not in grand theories, but in the small, quiet moments of life, in service to others, in the honesty of his labor, and in a simple, unwavering faith. He concluded that the very things he once dismissed as primitive were the keys to a life of true purpose. It was a complete reversal of his previous life, a radical act of humility. Tolstoy's final, most profound realization was this: love is the only thing not affected by death. He understood that the love we give and receive, the genuine care we have for others, is what gives our lives eternal meaning. He stopped searching for an answer to the why of life, and instead started living the how to be kind, how to be humble, how to live with a purpose that transcended his own ego. His crisis, though terrifying, became the very crucible in which he forged a new, authentic self. He found a new kind of freedom, not the freedom from responsibility, but the freedom to be himself, to live a life based on sincerity and love. This wasn't a philosophy, it was a way of being. So, what does Tolstoy's journey teach us? It's a powerful invitation to face our own existential crises, not with intellectual answers, but with the courage to live. It's about letting go of what society tells us to value and embracing what truly matters. The emptiness we feel isn't a sign of failure, but a call to live more authentically. It's a call to find meaning not in grand gestures, but in the quiet, humble acts of love and service. Tolstoy's life shows us that a life lived with sincerity, love, and courage is the only response that truly matters. He stopped asking why he was alive and simply began to live in a way that death could no longer hold any power over him.